If you're planning to buy in or around Breckenridge this year, there's a few major shifts happening right now, and if you don't understand them, you could make a really expensive mistake. Because what's happening in this market, it's not dramatic, which is exactly why people are getting it wrong. And here's the thing, none of this is obvious when you're just browsing online. In fact, most of the mistakes I'm seeing right now happen after buyers think they've already got it all figured out. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the 6 things you need to understand before you buy in the Breckenridge area in 2026, including the one shift that's quietly changing what a good deal actually is right now, because it's no longer just about price. Okay, so let's start with the biggest shift in 2026. The market is normalizing. It's not crashing, it's not booming, and that middle ground is where a lot of buyers misread what's actually happening because it feels slower, but it doesn't mean that it's weak. Homes are taking longer to sell. Buyers have more time and they're not rushing to decisions the way they were a few years ago, which sounds like a small change, but it completely shifts how you should approach buying right now. Things just feel quieter, and not slow in a bad way, just more measured. Because here's where it gets interesting. That slower pace is creating a much bigger gap between properties because buyers are being more selective. They're looking closer, comparing more, and not everything is moving anymore. Some properties are still selling really quickly and others are just sitting. And that difference matters a lot more than it used to. Now, pricing. This is where it gets a little confusing because you might hear that prices are down, but that doesn't necessarily mean that values are dropping across the board. And this is where I see buyers get tripped up all the time. What's really happening is the mix of what's selling has changed. Think of it as new construction and pre-construction developments versus single-family homes and condos. So depending on what's closing, the numbers can look very different, even when the overall market hasn't actually lost value, which creates this disconnect where headlines say one thing, but what's really happening here on the ground feels completely different. So instead of thinking of this as a down market, it's really more of a selective market. The right property priced correctly and presented well is still going to sell, sometimes faster than you'd expect. But if something is off, pricing, condition, or location, it just sits, and it can sit for a long time. And this is where that shift we talked about starts to show up, because it's not just about getting a good price anymore. It's about whether the property actually stands out in this market. Now, inventory. This is another piece that can be misleading. And if you don't understand this, you can completely misread your timing, because here in Summit County, inventory is very seasonal. And most buyers don't realize how much that impacts what they're seeing. In the spring, we start to see a noticeable influx of new listings. That builds through early summer and usually peaks around midsummer, which can make it feel like inventory is surging. But then as you move into late summer and fall, that inventory starts to get absorbed. And by winter, that's typically when we see the lowest inventory of the year. But here's the part that most people miss. A lot of properties here are rentals. So owners will actually pull them off the market and put them back into the rental pool to maximize revenue during ski season, which means what you're seeing in the winter isn't always the full picture. And that alone can completely change how you interpret the market. Even with that, buyers still have more options and more time than they've had in years. And that's where the opportunity is right now. But this is also where mistakes are happening, because in 2026, this isn't a market where everything is competitive, and it's not a market where everything is discounted either. It's a market where the right property stands out and everything else kind of blends into the background. And if you don't know how to spot the difference, you can really overpay for something that underperforms or miss something that was a really good opportunity, which is exactly why this next piece, what it actually costs to own here right now, is changing what a good deal really means in 2026. But here's where this really starts to hit buyers directly. Even if prices haven't changed dramatically, what it actually costs to own here has. And this is a shift that's redefining what a good deal really is right now, because two properties can be the same price and perform completely differently once you own them. And this is where I'm seeing buyers miscalculate, sometimes by thousands per year. Let's start with insurance, because this one surprises almost everyone. A lot of homeowners are seeing increases in that 20 to 40% range, and in some cases even more. And here's the part that doesn't make sense at first. Even here in Summit County, where we don't really deal a lot with hail, a lot of these increases are tied to hail claims across Colorado. So this isn't something you can just ignore or assume will level out. Then you've got property taxes. After the most recent reassessment, a lot of owners have seen increases, and in some cases, pretty meaningful ones. Still lower than a lot of other states, but definitely not what they were a few years ago. And then when you layer in everything else like HOA dues, rental licensing, compliance requirements, and this is where the numbers really start to shift, because what looks manageable on paper can feel very different month to month. And this is where the price versus performance gap really shows up, because it's not just about what you buy it for anymore. It's about how it carries. So that real question becomes, what does this property actually cost to own based on how you plan to use it? And honestly, this is one of the biggest areas where having local insight really matters, because the numbers you see online don't tell you the full story. This is something I walk through with buyers all the time, what it actually costs to own here based on your specific situation. So if you're starting to look at properties and you want clarity on those numbers, feel free to give me a call, shoot me an email, and let's have a conversation about what exactly that looks like for you. Now, this is still the biggest mistake I see buyers make, and it's even more important in 2026, because this is where a property can look perfect and completely fall apart as an investment. Short-term rules right now are capped, zoned, often waitlisted, and different in every single town. And licenses don't transfer with the sale, which means you really can't assume anything. And this is exactly where people get burned, because a property can check every box. Great location, great layout, strong rental history, and still not be rentable when you buy it. And that disconnect is costing buyers a lot of money right now. Because again, this goes back to performance, not price. A good deal that can't be rented the way you expect isn't a good deal. Now, here's where it gets even more nuanced. Some areas still work really well for short-term rentals. Some technically allow it, but it's hard to get a license. And some are essentially off the table unless you're willing to wait years. And most buyers don't realize which is which. And this is something I deal with every single day. I work with buyers who specifically want short-term rental properties, so I know exactly where you can rent, where you can't, and where the opportunities still are, because it's very location specific now. So if your goal is to buy a property and use it as a rental, make sure you reach out to me before you start writing offers, because finding the right property here is really about knowing the rules before you buy. And in a few minutes, I'll break down exactly where short-term rentals still works. Now, this is one of the biggest shifts this year, and almost nobody's talking about it, but it is going to seriously affect how people experience Summit County this summer. Snowpack this year is really low, record low, one of the lowest levels we've seen in decades, and that directly affects Lake Dillon, which then affects summer, which then affects buyers' perceptions. And this is where it gets really interesting, because a lot of buyers fall in love with this area in the summer. So what they see directly shapes how they feel about buying here. Lower snowpack can mean lower water levels, more exposed shoreline, less marina usability, and that changes the entire experience. At the Frisco Marina this summer, boat ramps may not be usable, over 100 slips could be impacted, Water levels could be around 20 feet below normal. That's a completely different leak experience, and most buyers aren't expecting that, which means expectations in reality can feel very different. And again, this ties back to performance, because how a property feels in the summer can influence demand and resale later. And that's something most people don't factor in. Now, let's talk about something that will affect you immediately when you're here. Now, this is one of the biggest current updates for 2026, and most buyers don't know about it yet, but they will feel it. CDOT, Colorado Department of Transportation, is starting a major rebuild of the Frisco exit this summer, and this is not a small project. It's going to run for a couple of years. It's going to start spring of 2026 and run through about 2028. So this is something you'll be living with if you buy right now. And here's why this matters, more than people think. This is one of the busiest access points in Summit County. So during construction, expect lane shifts, delays, more congestion, traffic, especially on peak weekends. And that's when most second homeowners are here. So this directly affects your experience. And again, this comes back to micro location, because where you buy can either amplify this or help you avoid it. And most buyers don't think about that up front. Long term, this will be a great improvement, but short term, this is something you're going to need to factor in, especially if ease of access matters to you. Now, let's bring this all together, because this is where strategy really matters. This is where I'm seeing the biggest mistakes happen in 2026, and most people don't realize it until after they buy. What I'm seeing right now is a shift in how buyers are thinking about rentals, not completely away from short-term rentals, but adjusting expectations. And this is where strategy comes in. More buyers are starting to look at midterm rentals. So think 30 to 90 day stays, ski season, summer season, remote workers. And here's why that matters. Midterm rentals can work really well while you're sitting on a wait list for a short-term rental license. And you don't need a license for midterm rentals, which is a big advantage right now, because short-term rentals are still very much in play, just not everywhere anymore. And this is where people get tripped up, because a property can look perfect, but if it's not in the right area, it doesn't matter. And I see this happen all the time. So where can you still find short-term rentals in 2026? This is where it gets very specific. The easiest areas are still Keystone and Copper, and in Breckenridge, the Resort Zone and Zone 1, and in Silverthorne, Zone 1. And then you have a couple of under-the-radar opportunities like Town of Blue River, Town of Dillon, where there's currently no caps. Now, on the flip side, this is where it can get a little harder. Breckenridge Zone 2 and Zone 3. Frisco. Both have caps and wait lists. But here's the nuance most people miss. Frisco is about a 1-year wait right now, which isn't ideal, but it's manageable with a midterm strategy. Breckenridge Zone 2 and 3, that can be multiple years. And that's a completely different situation, especially if rental income matters to you. And this is the part I want you to really take away. It's less about can I short-term rent and more about what's the right strategy for this specific property. Because again, this goes back to performance, not just price. And this is what separates a good purchase from a great one in 2026. So if you're thinking about buying in Summit County and you want clarity on what actually works in 2026, just reach out to me anytime. Let's have a conversation. If you like this video, check out some of these other videos right here.